This lecture deals with the early development of the English colonization period in 1607 in the Chesapeake, in Virginia, and specifically in Jamestown. So Jamestown is the first successful English colony, but about 20 years prior, the English had attempted to build a colony in Roanoke in North Carolina, and it fails. So in 1587, Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored the settlement through a joint stock company in Roanoke. By 1590, however, the colony had disappeared, and it became known as this lost colony, which was very likely adopted by the local Native American tribes as they struggled, which eventually Jamestown will. So England is aware of kind of this area in what will become the southern or central part of the United States because of this prior colony. So Sir Walter Raleigh pretty much finances Roanoke. So the English try again with Jamestown in 1606. They get this joint stock company known as the Virginia Company, which is this group of investors that bought the right to establish New World plantations from King James I. So they get that kind of royal decree that they can do this. And they go and they start getting money together for ships and materials and start finding people who would like to go to what will become Virginia in order to possibly gain riches. So they're trying to convince people to go of all different types and classes. So even though this is jumping ahead, it's really important to realize that kind of as soon as Jamestown is actually functioning, the Navigations Acts are passed, and this is also after Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay Colony are functioning. It was a series of laws that beginning in 1650 that would limit colonial trade. So it said that all trade must be done on British boats, all goods must go through British ports in order to be shipped to and from the colonies. They can only trade with Britain. It led to positive and negative effects for Britain and for the colonists themselves, but it leads to smuggling, which obviously will set us up for the 1760s and 1770s, where we eventually lead to revolution, partially because of these navigation acts. So the English could limit our trade and limit some economic activity directly as early as 1650, but it's going to become a much bigger issue about 100 years later. Also, something that's important to realize for the future American Revolution is what the Charter of the Virginia Company says. And this is chartered by the King and then written by the Virginia Company. It guaranteed colonists the same rights as Englishmen as if they had stayed in England. So it doesn't matter if I'm in Jamestown, Virginia, or in London. I am English, so therefore I get all the rights that come along with that. Obviously, when we get into no taxation without representation, this is going to be used as an argument against what the English eventually start doing after the 7 Years' War. So this provision incorporated to future colonist documents, both governmental and business documents, and colonists felt that even in the Americas they had the rights as Englishmen because it is guaranteed in the first successful colonies charter and subsequent colonial charters as well. So as they get to Jamestown, the boats that are going to Jamestown financed by the Virginia Company are a big mix of classes. So we have English gentlemen who are going across, in addition to very impoverished English people who are looking for kind of a new chance. They have indentured servants, so multiple different classes. But it kind of makes this class issue, they bring their class issues from England, which had no real social stratification. You were born the way you were and you died the way you were, over to Jamestown. So eventually, the famous Captain John Smith has to impose martial law a lot on these English gentlemen to make them work. So he famously said, "He who will not work will not eat," and that is in reaction to a lot of English gentlemen who expected these things to be done for them. Now, John Smith, kind of becomes the savior of Jamestown, but when he arrives, he is actually in the belly of the ship that he arrives in, chained up because he had attempted to create a mutiny for the first captain of the Jamestown, of the ships that are leading over to Jamestown. But they turn to him with his military expertise to try to save the Jamestown, especially when they get into the starving time about 2 years in, between 1609 and 1610, where they resorted to cannibalism, and they abandon the settlement to join Indian tribes. So it's seeming like that Roanoke 2.0 kind of is happening, but eventually they are saved partially by John Smith's leadership. One of the other major saviors is the Powhatan Confederacy, which is kind of the local Indian tribe that English will eventually have to befriend. They taught them what crops would be beneficial for their climate, because Virginia is very different from England or the Caribbean, where the English were somewhat involved as well. So there's the famous story that Pocahontas saves John Smith when he's going to be killed by Powhatan, and there's not necessarily definitive historical record that was actually that actually happened, or that it was not like a big kind of play that the Powhatan natives put on when they kind of accepted somebody into society. But she eventually is married off to John Rolfe at the age of 14, and helped to ease tensions between the natives and settlers. As more settlers start coming in, these natives realize that this may become a problem. So we see different images of Pocahontas. On the left, you see the famous image of her saving and stepping in to from the death of John Smith, and you see her bare-breasted, and this kind of becomes a big image of Native Americans, that they're kind of all natural. And in the American Revolution, they will actually use a Native American bare-breasted woman as the symbol of Columbia, as the symbol of what will become America. You see her in her marriage to John Rolfe, and then as somewhat of considered an English lady in the final image down in the right-hand corner, and she will actually die of European diseases as she travels to England. She's welcomed there and kind of seen as somewhat of a celebrity, but eventually she will succumb to diseases similar to many of her Native American brethren. So as I said, the English are learning new crops from the natives, and one of the most profitable eventually becomes the cash crop of tobacco in 1611. They've been growing it for years, and it becomes hugely popular in Europe and England specifically, and it becomes the determining factor of whether Virginia is going to be viable. So it requires vast acreage and depletes the soil, so you need large acres. Some of them aren't going to be used all the time, to have new crops planted. And this becomes the basis of Virginia's economy, but it also will result in rapid expansion, but it also results in the problems that come with expansion. Not only issues with labor, but issues also with the local Native American tribes, as they have to encroach more and more on Native American land to plant and successfully harvest the crop that the natives had taught them how to plant. So it's not just Jamestown, Virginia. We start to see Williamsburg and all these St. Mary's City, Annapolis, and what becomes Maryland, Delaware, and southern New Jersey become somewhat of this area of the Chesapeake. It's mostly focusing in what would become Virginia and Maryland as a major focus of English colonization. So Powhatan hoped that the alliance with the English settlers would give them an advantage over the enemy tribes. So again, as we talked about in period 1, the idea that Native Americans, were forced into these alliances, or that, the English did all this stuff to them. Powhatan is trying to make a political move against his rival tribes in the region, because he thinks the English and what they bring may benefit him over these other people. So the English forgot their debt to Powhatan as soon as they needed more land for tobacco, and they start continually pushing Powhatan further and further west. After numerous conflicts, the Powhatan Confederacy was eventually destroyed by English Indian fighters in 1644. So within that less than 40-year time frame between 1607 and 1644, the Powhatan Native Confederacy is destroyed because of English colonization, and obviously they won't be the only one. So as I mentioned, as they're growing these, become vast plantations, we need people to come over here. So they're coming over for financial reasons. England is incredibly overpopulated to the point where London and major cities are just so dense that it's actually unhealthy to live there. So there's famine, there's disease and poverty, and there's minimal chance in Europe generally of improving one's life. So this idea of, the vast riches of America would lead many people to opt for this indentured servitude. So they would get free passage over to the New World, and they were promised to serve 4 to 7 years of labor, and then they would receive their freedom. So the first slaves, or people who are kind of in somewhat bondage working in the New World, for the English at least, are their poorer brethren, the other English people. So they're getting this free passage. Who's paying for it? Wealthy planters would either, once they were there, pay for more, or as they were coming over here, would pay the crown, or would pay for the passage, and the crown would award them with 50 acres of land for every inhabitant that they brought over. So every time I brought a new indentured servant, I was guaranteed 50 acres. So you can start to see that the wealthy are going to have the wherewithal to be able to buy this land very quickly, and a class struggle was kind of brewing in early Virginia. So once you get there for your indentured servitude, if you're in indentured servitude, you are guaranteed property at the end. However, most people who got this position would not survive. So similar to kind of the Native American slavery, it's one of the reasons they have to turn to African slavery. It is popular, though. More than 75% of the 130,000 Englishmen who migrated were indentured servants because of this thought for opportunity that simply did not exist back home in England. And those who did survive would get land, but as you're seeing, a lot of the land is getting eaten up. So as you move into Western Virginia, you get into Appalachia, where you're getting less and less, good soil for producing land because it gets more rocky as you get close to the mountains. And that's what the indentured servants who were now freed would get if they got land at all. So as you see in the comparison of populations, you can see by 1610 at the beginning, there is clearly a majority of Native Americans. By 1650, that majority is gone as we defeated Powhatan, and as the English continue to come in and the natives decrease and indentured servitude will cause problems in the 1670s, we will see a large increase in African American slave labor that will come in after 1619. And 1619 is a very significant year in Jamestown and Virginia history because it shows kind of the vast dichotomy of what will become America. That in 1619, the Virginia gentlemen established the House of Burgesses, which any property-owning white male could vote in and participate in. So we're starting to see the establishment of like a republic or democratic government being built. At the same time, in the same year, we start to see African slavery coming over to the colonies. So this idea of freedom and somewhat more openness in political systems as compared with England, along with African slavery and obviously the lack of freedom that brings along with it, happening within the same year.